everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Ghost Furnace. I am Bond. I am here with my cohort, Nick, Pennsylvania. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing real good.
Excellent, man. I'm doing very well, too. I hope everyone out there listening is doing well also. Wanted to chat with everyone today as we're kind of getting into springtime and everything here in our part of the world, our part of the hemisphere. I'm starting to think a lot about traveling and going different places because we no longer have as much of the winter weather to contend with. Now it's just rain and pothole season here in Pennsylvania.
Although I will say we did have a good dusting of snow just yesterday.
We did, yes.
And it'll be 75 tomorrow.
Right, exactly. I still feel like we're due for one good, like, actual snow, but usually
be caught off guard.
Yeah, usually if we make it past St. Patrick's Day without a big snow, that's usually like the last one, but we'll see. As I'm looking at places to travel to and everything, I'm always looking at our kind of like ever-growing list here of spooky places that folks talk to us about. One of the places I've had on my list here for a while that is relatively local to us is Bedford Springs. This is an interesting place I want to talk about tonight, and just about like the idea of like these mineral springs in general, and touch on just kind of some of the hotels and the kind of the place they occupy, both in our folklore, but also kind of like in our history of like the country, especially. Because, I mean, over here in America, we don't have inns that are 500 years old like they do in some other countries in like Europe and other places.
Yeah, there's a few, but they're few and far between,
right,
and almost exclusive to Florida, Virginia, and Philadelphia.
Right, exactly. So, like, the place we're going to give an example of is operate as an inn for over 200 years. In some shape or capacity. Before we kind of get into that, though, Nick, do we have any other housekeeping or anything?
There isn't anything that I can think of at the moment. We're still waiting. We did hear from some people said we were going for low-hanging fruit by reaching out to the Belgian community.
Okay.
Low fruit for slow foxes, as I believe I responded, right. But I have not checked anything in a couple days. I will do that later.
No, that's all good. I know we do have a few interviews that we're trying to set up for April and May. But if you out there just want to always like plug this, if you have a story you want to share, or if you have something you'd like us to look into, let us know. We'd love to have folks on to talk about their experiences, or if you have places that you think we should look into, near or far. The list that we have over here is always growing, but can always use more additions. So, and this is a great example. Because I had no idea that Bedford Springs was supposedly haunted until one of our listeners mentioned it.
And I'll say, as far as Bedford Springs goes, even though I have not been there at the actual resort, this old resort sort of thing, I know the town of Bedford pretty well. I had a friend who ran a banjo store there for a good while. And it's a really cool town. It's a really historic town.
A lot of history.
Right. There's the fort there, and it's kind of on, it's on the Lincoln Highway, runs right through Bedford proper. It really is one of my favorite towns in Pennsylvania. It's a little south of Johnstown, a little south of Altoona. The turnpike runs right by it, and the fort's there, and there's a lot of history. There's a lot of the old buildings are very well preserved and cared for. In the town of Bedford, I know one of my favorite places is the Mary's Quilt Shop there. And
right.
I want to say it was built around 1804. So it's pretty old, established, and continued, especially for the region that we are in. We don't have a ton of early 19th century buildings. Most of our early 19th century buildings that we see are cabins that usually have been moved and fully restored several times over. Most of the buildings, I would say, at their oldest around here are probably 1840s.
Right. Yeah. 1840s, 1830s, and 1840s is really old around here.
Yeah.
Bedford, because like the area we're talking about, like Nick mentioned, this is right along current Route 76, which is the PA Turnpike. Historically, it was along the National Road, Forbes Road. and native paths before that. So
Yes.
people have been moving through this area for a long time. So this being kind of a bit of a hot spot is not anything new. If any of those landmarks sound familiar to anybody, we have talked more than once about the Jean Bonnet Tavern, which is right there, which I will never skip a chance to talk about because I love it there.
And I have never actually eaten there,
Oh
but I've
God, we
driven
need
past
to.
it a lot. It is actually west of
It
Bedford
is.
itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little west on like was it 30 or 31 there.
I actually have a banjo neck that was made in the early 60s in the neighboring town of Everett.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, right over
And
where it is.
coincidentally, I was in Bedford on Wednesday.
Oh,
We were
jeez.
recording on a Friday. So,
We
yeah, I was actually just there recently.
we need to
Boy, it's
go.
all coming together.
I know we need to go to the Jean Bonnet for lunch sometime soon.
We need to
That
go fish out there
we
by
do.
Snake Lick and
God,
everything,
yeah.
and
There's a few spots.
let's do it.
I know we have some listeners out in the area over there. So if you either A, want to get lunch with us, go fishing, or have another spooky place that we haven't talked about in the greater Bedford area, let us know. We would be interested.
You had me at lunch.
Right. But so the place that we're talking about here is Bedford Springs. So before there was a Bedford Springs inn and hotel and resort and spa, there have been these sulfur springs there for a long time. They're naturally occurring. They come right out of the ground. They're actual springs that come right out of the granite and the limestone of the area. According to a lot of sites, they were used as either they were used to a certain extent by the Iroquois and Shawnee nations that used to frequent the area and move through. So the springs themselves have been used as places of some sort of importance for a long time. So now where the kind of modern history comes in is a gentleman by the name of John Anderson purchased the land in 1796. Seeing that, people really liked these springs and everything and tried to, turn it into a bit of a destination. So this started as just a very small, there was one inn basically that wasn't even that close to the springs initially, but it would handle a few guests here and there, and just kind of kept growing, started adding more and more buildings. And within a few decades, it was a huge operation. Now, this place eventually became a national landmark in 1984. So there's a long period of time between 1796 and 1984, obviously, and there were lots of ups and downs for this resort. Now, hot springs in general had at least from what I can tell, had a big resurgence in the kind of like early 19th century, where you had a lot of people going to them for their healing properties. And as you kind of had some like class division happening, especially in the East, it became popular to have these like resort locations for people to travel to. And Bedford Springs, not that far from DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia. And even though it was kind of like in the frontier in those early days, like we said, there was established routes to it from all these other major arteries. So it really wasn't a really good location for the type of place that it was. It was kind of just far enough away that people felt like they were leaving the hustle and bustle of Washington. You had Thomas Jefferson going there. This eventually became the favorite location of James Buchanan. He referred to it as his second White House. Now, this place has like I said, a number of buildings. It's huge, hundreds of rooms. Do yourself a favor, look up some photos online whenever you can. It really is impressive. And it didn't always look like that, though. Because, like I said, a lot of ups and downs over the years. It's been renovated, it's been, reconstructed. It's had a lot of different owners that, like, it kind of falls into disrepair a little bit, and then someone buys it, pumps in a lot of money, and kind of restores it. So the place has a lot of history. And the reason why I think this Bedford Springs location, and you'll see everywhere if you look for it now, this is owned by the Omni hotel conglomerate now. So it's the Omni Bedford Springs. but it's one of these locations that has survived because there have been a lot of these places over the years. One of the ones that I get it mixed up with that actually isn't terribly far away is Berkeley Springs, which is south
Yeah,
in
that's in
West
West
Virginia.
Virginia. That's
Yeah.
where the Helldivers recorded, because
Oh, really?
That's where Wildhead Records was. It was on New Hope Road in Berkeley Springs, a cool town. Not a
Yeah.
really big town, but there is a lake just outside. I remember playing a wedding there on
Oh,
that lake. But yeah, really cool area. So a lot of these,
yeah.
as you mentioned, a lot of these springs and West Virginia had quite a few.
Hmm.
Virginia, obviously, at that time, it was still part of Virginia.
Right, right,
So the Commonwealth of Virginia had a few. Later on, I was going to mention some in New York, but
right.
there's a lot of there's Boiling Springs, which is
Hmm.
not too far from Bedford Springs as well.
Right. Great fishing there too, by the way.
Oh, really?
Oh, better. Yeah, Bowling Springs. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, there's an old
Um,
pencil factory there that's really neat, and they have like a well, we'll talk about that later.
but yeah, so there have been a lot of these places, but most of them don't have surviving, continually operated for the most part, inns that have been around for that long. Um, Now, one of the things that will play into this with the history is, as you can imagine, not all the history is good. One of the more famous elements of this location is it actually held Japanese diplomats after the Second World War as they were bringing folks over to kind of like handle things after the war had ended. So there's just been a lot of again like legitimate history, not just like, oh, people go there and they put their time in.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So it's a really interesting place, and there's actually a lot of books on it, just talking about the history of the location. If you go there today, you can actually take historic tours of the place. Now, as you can imagine, if a place does regular historic tours, there's probably a ghost tour, um, and this place is just ripe for ghost stories and hauntings and things like that, as you can kind of imagine. 200 plus year old ancient location of, hot springs. It's asking for it. And again, you get this a lot of places. So I think there's kind of a few things going on here. You have, obviously, let's first talk about the idea of the healing waters, actually, because that's what everyone was initially kind of coming here for in a lot of the situations. So different cultures have used healing waters in lots of different ways. We're obviously not going to cover all of those today, but generally speaking, with these sulfur springs, you would go to soak in them to help with any number of ailments, as far as the people who ran them said. Now they're just kind of used as like a general spa type thing. Nick, have you had any experience? Have you ever been to in a sulfur spring by chance?
Well, funny you bring it up. When when my wife and I were on honeymoon many years ago, and we've actually gone back to this place. We had intended to go back there our
Mm-hmm.
10-year anniversary, but I think we ended up going there on our 11th or 12th, just an odd year. Anyhow, we had taken all the blue highways and we were going up through the Adirondacks, and we were aiming to get to Vermont. We never made it that far, but we did get to the in the foothills of the Adirondack Range.
Mm-hmm.
There is a town called Sharon Spring, and we drove by a sign and we thought it said historic 1947 hotel, and we just been going again on these old two-lane
Mm-hmm.
highways, country highways, and kind of staying in towns and just kind of
Yeah.
seeing what there was. Well, we drove through this town,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a little mountain town. And then we are stunned because there is this like 1920s Spanish revival style
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
hotel, and it's 6 stories. It's the
Oh, wow.
size of a city block. I can bring up pictures here if you like. This was the Adler Hotel, and it had recently closed. So let me see.
Oh,
I had to.
interesting.
It was really cool, but that wasn't the hotel that was open. So this is the hotel we stayed at. What I'm showing
Pretty
you
cool
here, and I'll
looking.
talk about
Yeah.
that. But this is the Adler. You get some
Oh,
idea of its
yeah.
bigness. But let me do this for you real quick.
Man, a good old hotel in that part of the country is that's a
Here's what
vibe.
it looked like.
Ah, it's so
Okay?
cool.
It's very cool.
It's
Here's
cool.
what it looked like when we saw it.
Still very, very cool.
Very cool. And it's a hotel and spa. There's some of the inside. It is just crazy. What
Hmm.
we later learned was that famed New York Governor Ed Koch had actually worked there as a bellboy in like the 20s.
Oh, cool.
But we learned that later.
Yeah.
So what we did, we saw this massive, we got out and we just are looking at it. And you
Right.
want to
Yeah.
talk about our favorite thing to talk about, which is we looked at it and we're like, oh, that place is haunted.
Oh, yeah.
That it was just this rundown. But it was amazing. And even in its somewhat derelict state at that time,
Hmm.
it was just beautiful.
Right. Still, yeah.
So we do a Yui, we come back into the town proper. We were still in the town, but it's a
Hmm.
very wooded area.
Right. Right.
And we go and we realize, oh, it's not historic 1947 hotel. It's the American Hotel, Sharon Springs. It's still there. It's awesome.
Hmm.
I can attest. It is a historic 1847. And I know I've
Wow.
mentioned here that we went on honeymoon. We stayed in a room that both Oscar Wilde had stayed in the room.
Yeah.
Mark Twain had stayed at that hotel.
That's so cool.
They toured these resorts
Hmm.
giving lectures. The lecture circuit was a big thing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And we live not far from Chautauqua, New York, which of
Hmm.
course was one of these really famous lecture circuit
Still
stops.
is. Yeah. Still is.
Still,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, they kind of revived that a bit.
Hmm.
Somewhat infamously, the author Salman Rushdie,
Right.
when he was
Yep.
stabbed, that was up at when he was stabbed a couple years ago. That was up at Chautauqua.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we had a really cool time, and the whole town was built around these sulfur resorts.
Hmm.
And if you look up Sharon Springs, New York, and I encourage you to do so, there were various temples to the different minerals. So I remember there was the
That's such
temple
a cool
to
idea.
it was very Grecian like
Yeah.
the oracles built around
Hmm.
these same sort of things.
Yeah.
And so they had a temple to magnesium, there was a temple to sulfur, there were bathhouses, and there were numerous resorts. Most of them, I don't believe any were open at that time,
Hmm.
save for the American Hotel, which I can't say enough about. We got free drinks because the guys that run it loved our luggage. We have,
That
the
sounds
old tweed
about right.
suitcases, and usually,
That
we
checks
were
out.
coming in
Yeah.
in July, and somehow they're like, usually you have to have reservations here, but they had a
Hmm.
room. They were the nicest guys, and like I
Yeah.
said, we came back like 11 years later, and we still had a great time. I'm very happy we did that, but it was very cool. I can't stress enough. And
Hmm.
they had a whole scrapbook of how they had gone about restoring the place, and they were really digging into the history of the town. And so they
That's
had,
so cool.
yeah. And here's what's really interesting. So the American highway system kind of killed some of these,
Some of them. Yeah.
right, including Sharon Springs. It was really atrophying in the 1930s and the 1940s. Well, one of the kind of sly things the magnates of town did, one of the last gasps, and we found this out a little later. The morning we were there, we were walking around the town just still in awe, and we heard a lot of people speaking German, which isn't that crazy because of course we have a lot of Deutsch. We talk about this here
Hmm.
in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot up in upstate New York as
Hmm.
well.
Right.
But you hear the Deitch, you kind of
Yeah.
have an idea. That was not this.
It
This
was
is
so
very
different.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, here's what in the 40s, late 40s after the war, of course, the German government, in the wake of the Third Reich,
Hmm.
had to pay reparations to the victims of the final solution.
Hmm.
A lot of those, well, not a lot, but some of those people were able, as part of the reparations, to come to Sharon Springs
Wow.
because it was this
Wow.
resort. It was therapeutic. It was all of these things.
Yeah.
And so there were, at the time we were there, still vestiges
Mm-hmm.
of these Slavic people and
Yeah.
German people that were living still in
That's
Sharon
so
Springs. They
cool.
were almost all very elderly,
Right.
but I can imagine like they may have come over as like teenagers or
Right.
whatnot,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
be speaking that living room language of their
Mm-hmm.
parents who had come over as
Right.
part of the German reparations to the surviving victims of the
Mm-hmm.
Holocaust.
Right.
Pretty wild. And
Yeah.
that was kind of what kept Sharon Springs
Going
going
for a
on. And
while.
I
Yeah.
imagine other resorts have that same thing. But
Mm-hmm.
if I haven't intrigued you yet, I really stress check it out because it was a resort community
Right.
from the
Right.
early 19th century into the 1950s, and it's kind of bouncing back today. There are
Right.
parts of town that do smell of sulfur. That's an
Mm-hmm.
acquired taste, but
Right, it
it's very
definitely, yeah,
cool.
it definitely is. But again, like Bedford Springs and like some of these other places, that the reason a lot of them didn't last is like you said, because these were basically our first, our culture and our economy's first attempts at sustained like hospitality centric towns and cities. Those really didn't exist before these things popped up. So that's again why I think they kind of occupy a very unique niche in our culture and our society and our history. So again, as you can kind of imagine, there's just a lot going on here. Now, with the healing waters themselves, one of the things that I did kind of want to talk about and get your thoughts on, Nick, is I think whenever you see, especially if you guys look and see the old like ads for these places, which are usually pretty cool because they're like, it's just advertising from way back when, but there's a lot of fantastic claims made throughout the decades. Everything from curing uncurable diseases to it just being a nice place to hang out and relax. You see spikes with them around some of the TB outbreaks and some of the yellow fever outbreaks and things like that, saying that it's going to cure things. Now, people still think that these things have, healing properties because of the sulfur and everything, or any of the other minerals, that are centric to these springs. And I think just this is me speaking personally now. When I was younger, I was always like, that sounds so like bunk. Like I can't believe people were like into that,
Yeah.
at a time. But like as I have gained more experience, um, I would say that in talking to, because I've never actually gone to one of these spas and enjoyed one myself, so I'm speaking from second and third hand experience here. It seems like people who do go to these things really do enjoy them. And even if they don't heal quote unquote people for the reasons or to the extent that they were maybe originally sold as, there is something to just like going somewhere new, relaxing, drinking more water or getting just different different things in you than you normally would. uh I was talking to my cousin about this to get her kind of like, she's in the medical profession, and I was like, do you just casually, like, do you think there's anything like to that? And I mentioned like how people will like soak their like ankles in like Epsom salt,
Yeah, I do that
first. Yeah.
periodically.
And
Yeah.
yeah, which like, and I'm always like, like, I'm like, I just don't see how this helps. And my cousin was like, well, at the very least, it probably starts to dehydrate people. Therefore they drink more water, and everyone thinks they drink enough water and almost no one does. That's what she said. So if you go somewhere and you're drinking more water than you normally would be, then you're probably going to start feeling better, generally speaking, which I just thought was a very practical take on it. So yes, even if these places do not have the magic healing powers that some of them portend, they're still useful. At the very least, if you're just relaxing and having a good time, Lord knows we need more of that anyway.
Well,
So,
and I would make the argument too that especially the peak of these resorts, I would say is
mhm.
Gilded Age.
Oh,
And
for
if you're
sure. Yeah.
right, if you are coming from the cities,
Hmm.
Pittsburgh, the industrial
Yeah.
cities of the Atlantic seaboard, Buffalo,
Hmm.
Rochester, Pittsburgh, Bethlehem, Harrisburg, all these places probably does you a world of good just to get out into the fresh air. right?
Like literally, yeah,
So
yeah.
even that, even calming down, all those things can't be bad for you.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, I just want to give everyone kind of like that, our 2 cents on that, and kind of some of that context. So, like, even though a lot of these places do claim to have, again, like literally they use the term magic waters, they're still beneficial. So, even we are not above agreeing that, if you're just relaxing a bit, that's probably going to be helpful. So, by proxy, good for you. So, again, places like this that have this much history and have, because we always talk about like liminality when we talk about hotels, because it's a place that is in transition all the time, and people are always coming and going, and if there is anything to people bringing intent and energy into places, these are kind of like big melting pots. So if you have one that has a long history of people doing that, then older hotels should in theory be more haunted than newer hotels. If you then have a hotel that apparently has magic waters running through it, it should stand to reason, right, that it's going to be even more haunted. And when we look at Bedford Springs, like many of these places, there is a pretty serious history of it being haunted throughout the years. Whenever you look up Bedford Springs and haunted, you're going to find a lot of the things that you would kind of expect. Everything from sounds to apparitions to things moving. It's a lot of the general kind of like, oh, this is a haunted place kind of thing. And whenever I was looking into it, I right off the bat saw a lot of ads for their ghost tours. Some people saying the ghost tours at this place were really good. Other people very particularly saying that they weren't very good, which is typical of ghost tour reviews. If they're all good, they're probably not real reviews. When I was looking up these ghost tours, I found a book that was written by someone who did the tours for a long time. And again, a lot of the stories that they kind of cover are very just like I would say mundane, but the things you would kind of expect. But this gentleman did have a take that I thought was interesting. Is this ghost tour guide says that they started doing this round of ghost tours. I think in 2012 was when they kind of started this again. These people started doing them.
That's kind of a little later than I would have expected, honestly.
I'm sure they did them earlier, but there was a big restoration project from 2004 to 2007, and
Oh,
I
okay.
think a change in ownership. There's been quite a few changes in ownerships over the years. That was like this run of ghost tours that went up to
Makes
2020.
sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
I'm sure they did it before that, given people's propensities.
Well, and I was
But
just thinking the popularity. I mean, we talked a lot
right.
about 2005 is when, or 2003, 4, 5 is when all the ghost shows started really
Right. So
taking
they
over.
probably had one before that, but this particular author was started them in 20. Let me find out. Yeah, 2014. This gentleman John, who is a one of the people who gives the ghost tours, when talking about it, it sounds like it's very much there's a lot of show elements to it. There's a little bit of like the people dressed in period garb. A lot of it is very Victorian and Edwardian centric. So it's a lot of late 19th century stuff.
Again, kind of the peak era.
Right.
Like I said,
Yeah.
Gilded Age jives
Right,
with Edwardian.
exactly. Yeah. So even though this place had a history before that and had a history after that, they kind of focus on that era because it was the most popular, most consistently popular from basically the 1840s up through the early 1900s.
And it also jives with what we say, like the peak era of like when
Prime, yeah,
ghosts appear.
yeah,
It kind of
prime,
peters
yeah.
off in the 20s.
Right, exactly. Which is funny that we mentioned that again, but that's what they're kind of leaning towards here. The main like area that they do the tours in is one of the main buildings that's like one of the older ones. I'm not sure exactly when that part was built. 1832. Yes, was when that part was built. So it's old, but it was added on a bunch and everything. If you look at pictures, it's a sprawling place. But they filled a lot of the area with artifacts from that time period. It's not been that area is not like quote unquote modernized with like some of that furniture and everything. So But this gentleman, John, makes what I think is an interesting observation, considering he's doing this for so long. He says as they've spent more time in those areas doing those ghost walks, he has seen a incremental but steady uptick in activity in that area over the years. And he kind of postulates something that we've heard people talk about before, is that when you kind of put an intention into an area over and over and over again and draw people's focus, you tend to get more activity. And not necessarily activity while they're doing the tours necessarily, but just the area in general seems to be have been getting more haunted over the years as they've been doing these tours and everything. So he kind of
Well,
brings up the idea that, like, are we kind of creating some of these ghosts, which makes me think of the whole Philip experiment thing.
I am glad you say that because here's the deal. You're going through, I don't think everybody that is a tour guide on a ghost walk believes in ghosts.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, I've said I don't think I really believe in it
Hmm.
at all, but I love the history,
Right.
and
Yeah.
people that are attracted usually are people that share a love of history, and storytelling's
Right.
great, and they're great stories.
The Venn diagram is a circle. Yeah.
Yeah, but even though I say that, I am leery to go into my basement in the
Right.
middle of the night. I mean, I'm an adult, I do it, but it's not something I get excited to do because,
I do
you
it.
know,
Trust me. I totally go to my basement
yeah.
at night. No one question. Yeah.
Well, you stayed in my coal room with me,
I
and that was
know
spooky.
it
It's
is
a
a spooky
spooky
cold.
room.
It was a spooky room at noon. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah.
And you can see if, those photos of you and I in my coal
Right.
room
Right.
acting like we're seeing something spooky. So there's that. There's
Hmm.
also that you could be looking for something. You're kind of manifesting these stories just by
Right.
putting it out there so hard.
Right.
And people are coming in, and I think a lot of people that do these tours are in the same boat. They don't believe, but they love the stories and then they want to know the history. But then there are the people that do believe and are
Totally.
actively looking. And so something that you might hear a sound and you're going to be quicker to attribute
To
it
attribute. Yeah.
to a ghost or something when it could just as easily be explained by purely natural means.
Right. No, I think there's definitely something to that. But I do also think that if we go with the premise that a place can become more haunted, with whatever haunted means, through people's attention to an area, because we've heard that happen other places where you see an uptick in activity once a place has gained a reputation for being haunted.
Well, and that's what makes me think it's more about haunted people and not haunted
Right,
places.
right,
Because I think of, there were ghost stories about the Montreal Forum.
right. Places like that. Yeah.
That was a very active place. People, there was a lot of energy, a lot of motion.
Hmm.
You would think that, full-bodied apparitions would have,
Right.
like Maurice Richard would have appeared,
Yeah.
Phantom Joe Malone would have appeared on center ice
Right.
with all the
Right.
energy and everybody's there on home games. And, you don't see that,
You don't.
right?
Right. Yeah.
So there I go.
Yeah.
That's
No.
my
No.
thinking.
But I did like that this ghost guide, like, kind of brought that perspective, because, like, yeah, that's someone who, is, in theory, is kind of an expert on that location. And I thought the fact that, he called out, like, hey, this seems like we're paying more attention to this area, and as we're surrounding ourselves with all these Victorian objects, it seems like we're more likely to have activity.
I just wanted to show you Phantom Joe Malone real quick.
That's pretty sweet.
Spooky looking dude.
He is a spooky looking dude.
Buddy was
Yeah.
pretty rough.
But yeah, so these tours seem like they're very very entertaining. But so the actual activity in the area, like I said, is very kind of like general. You have it reported by both the guests and the staff. A lot of what I found, as far as like just like firsthand, a lot of it's just like firsthand, like anecdotal stuff where people just say like, oh yeah, it's generally spooky. They generally hear things. There was a few ones that I thought were kind of cool though, even though they were kind of short. But again, this is kind of like, I don't know, like whenever I hear someone have like a one sentence story, it's like, oh well, there's something to that maybe, with the brevity. So one that comes up a lot is there's a pool. If you've ever been in like some of these old pools, like there's a Y downtown that has like a pool that was built in like 10 or something like that. It's like all ceramic. It's like they're huge. The sound, again, we've talked about how sound is weird. Like if there's a place where you're going to hear disembodied voices, a old pool is a great place to do it.
Lots of tile.
Lots, there's so much tile and
It's a
like
reverb chamber.
yeah, it's basically a big echo chamber, and like water sounds weird in the best situations.
Oh, and sound bouncing off water.
Water and through water. It's just so like I was not surprised to see everyone be like, "Oh, the pool's haunted." Lots of weird noises. Um,
Well, plus there's easy to concoct stories of people drowning in a pool.
but yeah, so the pool is apparently haunted. I did see it on a few places. There were references to a child apparition, a small young boy who is seen playing in the pool when there like shouldn't be a kid there, or people see a kid, they see him running, they think like, who the heck is watching this kid, and they look back and he's not there anymore. On a few times they because they actually have like a pipe. Like a hose type thing coming in to fill up the pool from the sulfur springs, and there's times where people say they literally see the kid playing with like the hose and everything, then realize that he is in fact not there. So a child apparition by the pool again is kind of what you would expect, but that comes up a lot of places. Everyone sounds like there's a consensus that if anywhere in this place is haunted, it is in fact the pool. But I wasn't able to find any like stories specifically of like you said, like mysterious deaths in the pool or anything like that. I'm sure they happened, but I couldn't find anything that attributed that to any ghosts directly. Now, people hear voices in the halls. They're in the one wing on the west side. People hear voices specifically of a young girl in the halls asking them questions about her being lost, which is super spooky. If I just heard a little girl asking, to help her because she's lost in a place like this. One of the ones I thought was kind of funny because like we talk about like the lack of modern ghosts in places like this. So in the office area, apparently there is a relatively famous ghost that will actually sit in the cubicles and type at a computer. People don't see the
Oh,
ghost, but they hear like the click clack of like a mechanical keyboard, which again, I don't know if that's necessarily a ghost versus like residual energy, from someone just working too hard and too long. Or it might be more of like a time phenomena.
you
But
just don't want to come to terms with the fact that somebody's onto us and saying we need to create some new wives' tales.
we do, we do. But like I guess just like the idea of like imagine a sentient haunting. Like, because like again, if it's a residual haunting and it's just like a thing replaying, that doesn't bother me. But for some reason, the idea of a ghost who is like apporting every day or night at the same time, and they're like, oh, I gotta sit down and finish these emails,
Right,
and then just
yeah.
typing away. That's
That
scary
sounds
on a
like hell to
level.
you.
Yeah, that sounds awful. As someone who sends 1,000 emails a day, like you know how it is. It's just
Hmm.
like that. For some reason, that's scarier than like a little girl like spooking you out in the hall. Like, I'm just like a ghost, like the ghost of middle management in a cubicle is way
Well, it's
worse.
like it's one of those office workers that comes back from vacation and says they need a vacation from vacation.
Oh my
I
God,
hate that. I
God,
hate
just
that. You're doing
everyone,
it wrong.
just
This
stop.
is somebody's
Yeah.
like, oh, after this death, I need a death just to
Oh,
relax a little bit.
right. Probably take some time
Terrible.
off.
I changed
Yeah.
my mind. I don't like this.
Yeah. Right. It gets worse the more you think about it.
Hmm.
But I thought that was funny because it's like I didn't expect a keyboard utilizing Ghost at this hotel. So I thought it was cool that that story kind of came up
Imagine
a
how weird
bunch.
it is for, I mean, obviously, I
Yeah.
don't buy it, but imagine how weird it is for that ghost. You're working, you look over and there's a bunch of people with cell phones and everything being led by Little Lord Fauntleroy or
Right.
something. Be like, what is this?
Right. Yeah, it's a weird it's just a weird area. One of the ones that I thought was interesting because like I'd love to know I guess like the impetus of it. So there was someone who reported that like their part of the story is they would go there and work out in the mornings back in the early 2000s before going to work, it sounded like. And they'd be sitting there waiting for their friend to come out of the locker rooms and everything. And they would be sitting in like the little, like kind of like library study area that's right near there. And they would often hear scraping of glass. And they didn't know what that was at first. And they thought it was kind of spooky. And then after talking to a staff member, the staff member said what they think it is it's a ghost who was testing the legitimacy of a diamond ring from some like jilted lover kind of thing on the windows, which I'm like, that is such a specific
I need to
thing.
test if something's a real diamond, yes, because
Yeah,
diamond cuts, but I don't know. I would think that
right,
sort of vanity would die with me. But
right.
I
You would
guess you're
hope.
saying it's residual. But
Yeah,
if
that's what it
it's
sounds
residual,
like.
then it's
Yeah.
like, oh man, if these staff see you vandalizing,
Over and over again. How
yeah.
embarrassing for
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
person. But again, that was one of those ones that was like so specific where I was just like, I don't know. That's that's a
I
weird
think
one.
whoever gave the explanation was doing that, but blamed it on the ghost just in case,
Maybe,
draw
yeah.
the heat off of
Right,
them.
draw that. That's you can get away with a lot more if you're a lazy
That's
staff member
true.
at a haunted hotel than you can at
I
a
swear to God, I had these reports done. I printed them, I picked them up. They were on my desk. I was getting ready to send them to you. Ghosts. I
right.
come back, all the pages are blank. Look at this.
Oh
Look
my
at
God.
this.
Yeah, it's scarier than yeah, the other options, I guess. But it's just yeah,
But
so
and
I thought that was
reputation, what are they going to do? How are they going to hold me accountable? Come on, come on. We got ghost testing rings
you
out
guys
here.
know we're just lousy. The place is lousy with ghosts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
come on. I can't be. I can't. How do you expect me to perform in these conditions?
But it does sound like the staff generally is like into the history and the haunting and everything at this place. I mean, like I guess you kind of have to be if you're working at a place like this, especially if you're doing like a public facing role, you'd think. But yeah, so it's a lot of stories like that. So it's one of those things where I was honestly kind of hoping to find like a bunch of like really hyper specific stories about this place, but it's all like I said, just very general, like the kind of stuff you expect at an old haunted hotel. But I think the fact that this place has stayed around for as long as it has and has had so many different lives and usages, it's kind of haunted by its past just as much as it is by the present, by ghosts, you know?
Yeah, I'm thinking there's an old hotel that's now apartments in
Mm-hmm.
downtown Bedford proper. And
Okay.
it
Yeah.
shares a similar sort of story. I want to say
Mm-hmm.
presidents, I want to say Eisenhower stayed there or
Oh,
something.
interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I'll have to look into it, but I'm sure that it has its own share of stories because, I mean, the thing is, hotels are places of transience.
Right.
Even when in the days that were more common for people to live in hotels for weeks at a time,
Mm-hmm.
still a lot of, like you say, a lot of people coming and going, a building of 1,000 uses,
Right.
and you think, especially like a resort, and that's what this is, people
Right.
are going to have really high emotional times and stories tied to these
Mm-hmm.
specific places. So it stands to reason that the stories will linger
Right.
after the people are gone or long into, well into their life. Yeah.
Right. Especially because, like you said, people, when they want to kind of like talk about how good of a time they had, when you're talking about the history and about some of this other stuff, you're more likely to again keep those stories going of like, oh yeah, I heard some voices in the hall, or I thought I saw this little kid running around, or
It's
something along
it's
those lines.
partly that idea of not wanting to let go of a thing.
Oh, for sure. No, I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And you can forgive the people, I think, for that.
Absolutely.
You
I
know?
understand that. I
Yeah.
especially the older I get and the more say goodbye to people and
Mm-hmm.
knowing I won't. It's I can definitely understand that. It's a part of grief, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
or
Right.
just acknowledge that things will change, sometimes in
I
ways that you don't care for.
You don't care for it. But and I wonder if like when you have a place like this that has that kind of longevity, if is that in itself a bit of a reprieve because you're like
A
this place has been here.
reprieve?
Yeah, because this place has been here for 200 years. Is there a comfort in knowing that it might be here for another 200 years? So
Mm.
this is a bit of permanence when you're surrounded by impermanence. I
But
wonder.
there's places you've lived that
Hmm.
have changed dramatically.
Right.
And they've
Yeah.
been places, they've been changed. Like, I've lamented about the town we had lived in, or I lived in,
Hmm.
and you lived next door,
Yeah. Yeah.
and saying, it's changed so much that the sort of people that live there now are not the sort of people that lived there when I was growing up. And I do lament that.
Hmm.
But I also have to acknowledge the fact that it was changing before I ever was
Right.
born. It
Right.
was something else entirely, and it certainly had a different stock of people
Hmm.
than when I knew it. And so I walked around people and enjoyed being with people who were older than me that had known
Hmm.
that town, and probably lamented the different changes that I didn't recognize, because
Right.
I was I feel like places stay stagnant
Hmm.
for long enough swaths of time that when change starts to happen, you really feel it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Or it creeps in little by little, but all of a sudden it seems like, oh, this is being a big change, and when did this happen, sort of
Right.
thing. I imagine that even though something's been there a long time, like you said, it's being renovated, it's sprawling, it
Hmm.
does change.
It does. Right.
And
Right.
if you worked there 40 years ago, you might feel weirded by the ghost store thing, or I don't know. There's just something being there isn't unchanging. And
Right.
then there's the other part where, like, when things don't change and you come back to them and you realize, oh, they weren't what I thought they were, or it's a
Right.
lot smaller than I remember, things like that.
Right. Right.
I think a lot of this has to do with our thoughts
Our perception
about.
of the place. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Our perception of the place and of time and
Of
our
time.
relationship
Yeah.
to it.
Right. Yeah. No, I think, again, I think this is a great example of a place where I think that if no one is in this hotel, I don't think there's ghosts walking around it.